Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Lottis with the Gaithersburg Community Museum. And before we start anything else, we're laughing because we are having some technical difficulties, and part of it is because we're not on our usual computers. And I won't go into all the details, but we will be recording this and it will be available for people to listen to. So all the people who registered who may not be able to sign in, we'll all have a chance to see this and many others. So we're going to get started. Again, I'm Karen Lattis with the Gaithersburg Community Museum. This is the second program in our Gaithersburg History Project Black Gaithersburg series. Gaithersburg History Project is a multi-year endeavor by the City of Gaithersburg to understand more about the different populations that make up Gaithersburg and make us such a diverse city. And so this is Black Gaithersburg is just the beginning. We'll be looking at other groups. Probably the next group, we'll be looking at the Latino community, the Asian community, just trying to understand more about the history of these groups here in Gaithersburg, why they chose to make Gaithersburg their home, especially for some of the large groups that have immigrated in more recent years. So the next program, we'll be looking at women's voices. That will be Wednesday, March 8th. Also, this is the first program we've decided to try and do during the day. So you can let us know if you appreciated it or perhaps we made a miss. As we go forward, the next program will also be on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So I'm going to turn this over to our speaker. Tony Cohen is with the Menare Foundation, and he has been spearheading the research on this project. It's been all very exciting for us. And I hope it's been exciting for Tony too.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am going to present today. And Karen, you can go to the first slide. Is it up?
Okay, will do.
There we go. Look at that. All right. My name is Tony Cohen. I'm the historian and founder of the Menare Foundation, Inc., and the lead researcher on the Gaithersburg Black History Project, which is funded by the City of Gaithersburg and the Gaithersburg Community Museum. So thanks for joining us today. So in recognition of Black History Month, which I guess is officially February, but unofficially runs from January 15th to March 15th, because there's that much Black history. We are going to provide an update today on the project and share some of what I've discovered on the Black presence in Gaithersburg's history. I'll also touch on the project scope and discuss the research tools and methods that I'm using with a focus on the following: early settlement of Gaithersburg and Black Gaithersburg and vicinity, first evidence of African-American population, and formation of family groups around what is now the downtown core, and evidence of autonomy and resistance to enslavement leading up to the time of the Civil War. What I won't cover today are the topics of religious institutions, early education, the emergence of civil and social society, segregation, public housing, and civil rights in the century and a half following emancipation. So we're going to keep everything up to the Civil War, but those topics will be discussed at a later date. And to echo what Karen said earlier, on March 8th, I believe the date still is, check your mail. I will be back to address some of those topics in the follow-up presentation on the role of Black women in the development of Gaithersburg in observance of Women's History Month. So be on the lookout for that. All right, so let's jump in. Next slide, please. Oh, did I lose Karen?
No, you did not lose me, but I'm wondering if
It's either a tab. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yes, it was a technical thing.
Okay. No problem. Until now, little research has been done on the origins of African Americans in Gaithersburg. Classic histories on the African American church and schools in Montgomery County, penned by historians such as Nina Clark, some 40 years ago, have illuminated the post-emancipation period as African Americans began to emerge more fully fleshed in the historical record. To glean what developed before this period, we must look to the early white settlers who brought the first enslaved people to the region. So we'll first take a look at the study area. I put together a simple map with the areas we are defining as Gaithersburg. This includes the present-day city center, areas of incorporation, as well as historic satellite communities. So if you look at the map, beginning just north of Durwood, where that weird green circle is, I don't know why it's green. We start there. The line follows the pike north to Shady Grove Road, continuing east of Washington Grove, and making a turn, left turn onto Muncaster Mill Road, and proceeding to Route 124, also known as Woodfield Road. Heading north past the Air Park, we skirt the southwest edge of Laytonsville to encompass the Black enclave of Brook Grove before turning left again at Brink Road to include the Goshen area and post-emancipation Prathertown. From there, we'll follow Brink Road to Whiteman Road near its intersection with Great Seneca Creek and easternmost edge of Germantown. Heading south along the historic milling waterway to Clopper's Mill site in Seneca Creek State Park. We then follow Clopper Road east, then south along Long Draft Road to its conclusion at Quince Orchard. And from there, heading east along Route 28 and Key West Drive forms the southern reaches of our study area. Before picking up Redland Road, you can't do this by car, and proceeding through King Farm and concluding where we began. That gives an idea of the study area. Next, please. And by the way, included in this zone is the aforementioned communities along with Emory Grove, Stewarttown, Metropolitan Grove, Pleasant View, and about a dozen or more historic crossroads or pocket communities that we'll discuss at a future date. Next, please. Thanks. All right, and here we have a more historical view. The background you see is the 1865 Martinet and Bond map of Montgomery County with the area that we're focusing on. A couple of things to note. This was also produced in the year that the Civil War ended, so it's a really good bookend for our story, and it puts us in terms of research at a really good point to understand the slavery landscape before it disappears with the 1870s. Some of the communities, again, Prathertown and Stewarttown, which were post-war Black settlements, emerged in what is now Montgomery Village. Flower Hill, which is the name of an old land grant, was the land upon which Emery Grove was created. Down at Seneca Creek State Park was the Woodlands, an old plantation, and from there sprang up communities close by of Clopper and Metropolitan Grove after the war. The Shefali Farm is in the location of present-day Kentlands, and I'm not sure the mansion was there at the time that's pictured, but there was Black labor used on that farm and in that area. And Pleasant View, located in Quince Orchard, another historically Black community. And today, I will mention when the time is right, Summit Hall and some information about it. Next, please. So a couple of things. Gaithersburg, though small at first, grew to encompass the areas you just saw on the last map. Many of the rural farming families moved from the outlying areas into the village over time. And we'll look at some of that today. But first, I wanted to share some of the sources that I'm consulting as part of this project. I think what is allowing us to find new information is the advent of records on the internet. The internet's been around and at our fingertips for about 30 years, but it never fails to surprise me as to what ends up there on a daily basis. And so a lot of archival research is really at our fingertips today and has accelerated the research process. Also through well-designed search engines, you can organize and search for information that will reveal patterns, historical patterns that might not be evident if you're doing rank and file strictly by the stacks type research. But I'm doing a little bit of both. One of the sites that has been extremely helpful is the State of Maryland Hall of Records Legacy of Slavery in Maryland website. This first took shape about 20 years ago, and they keep adding to it as they cull their records and for any references to the African-American experience in Maryland, and digitize those records and put them online. So that has made searching names, census and some land records, but things like manumission records, runaway slave notices, tax assessments, anything that mentions the enslaved. And so a wealth of information has bubbled up from there. Down to the bottom, our planning department here in Montgomery County has a number of new tools that are available to the public. Some mapping tools, which show historic communities and sites, other historical resources, including cemetery records. So those turn out to be very helpful. Also an online source which has really accelerated the research is ancestry.com. Not only the kind of breadth of documentation that's available, but you can actually discover who is researching the same people you're researching and make contact with them. And along with DNA, that can be useful, and I hope it will be useful in this project on making a few family connections when we get to that point. I should not leave out traditional research. Montgomery County Historical Society has been fantastic. Sarah Hedlund, if you haven't met her or know of her magical powers, please reach out to her. She's absolutely amazing and has really helped push this project forward. The other image I put up here was to the National Park Service's Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. There are a few sites which connect with the story of the Underground Railroad that I'm hoping to document a little bit more, and hopefully we might be able to get some Network to Freedom designation for a site in Gaithersburg. I hope. Next, please. All right. When I started the project, I really wanted to go back to the beginning. First of all, what are we talking about when we're talking about Germantown, which I've described before, the area of focus, but who was there? Montgomery County has that wonderful distinction of being formed in 1776, carved from Frederick County, which was carved from Anne Arundel, so forth and so on. So some of the earliest settlers to the area established themselves, set up shop, and their location throughout the records has changed over time as the boundaries of different jurisdictions have changed. So one of the things I was looking to do was to go through the old Plat Maps. These that you see is part of an overlay project that Montgomery History worked on a number of years ago, where they took the old Plat Maps, plotted out the delineations of the original land, and created overlays on current maps. Well, this map is from 1984, but it's current enough. And so you can see where the old landlines are. Prominent landowners in this early period could own hundreds or sometimes thousands of acres, and their tenancies on vast holdings can often be difficult to decipher. On this map, I put two historic locations. The red one is located along Rockville Pike in the Crabs Branch area, and the teal one represents the location of Summit Hall. One of the first families to the area were the Crabs, who established their seat in the county at this location in the 1720s. This is in Durwood, just south of Shady Grove Metro, and the land is there along a stream which still bears the family name, which is Crabs Branch. According to tax rolls, Jeremiah Crabb owned several hundred acres of land and enslaved more than 20 people during the course of his lifetime. Most certainly, those enslaved did not manage the entirety of the vast land holdings, but worked to improve portions on which Crabb lived and cultivated. Crabb, like others who would come to the area, held valuable tracts of agriculture, timbering, water-powered mills, or land as speculation, selling to neighbors over time while passing other tracts on to their descendants. George Briscoe, another large landholder, bought and sold lots along 355 just north of Crabb's estate, and in an area that would come to be known as Log Town, and for a time even fashioned as Germansburg, which has nothing to do with Germantown, and the name after a short time died out. In the first decade of the 19th century, this would become the seat of the Antebellum family, who established Summit Hall, the historical mansion at the heart of today's Boer Park, which is also owned by the City of Gaithersburg. Early land patents on which these settlements were established bear the names of these original founders, such as Crabb's Garden and Cook's Range, along with forgotten names such as Valentine's Garden and Lost Hatchet, among others. I'm not sure how well you can see the map, but one of the patents is for need wood. There was evidently a shortage of wood. Well, that's today's Needwood. And also Deer Park still remain on the landscape. These early land records have been essential in determining where settlers were located, as they are mentioned in land and tax records alongside those they enslaved. Multiple election districts over time also make deciphering the location of people difficult. It wasn't until after the Civil War, when Gaithersburg was incorporated, and even by the time of the Civil War, it was going by that name, but on census records, you don't necessarily get a clear picture of where Gaithersburg begins and ends. Other prominent slaveholding landowners bore the names of Briscoe, Brooke, Fulks, Burgess, and of course the Gaithers family, whose name would adhere to the land. Next, please. All right. So this is my favorite slide of the day. Suffice it to say that little is known about Africans arriving with these early settlers, except for statistics that might be gleaned from early tax records and census returns. Names were seldom recorded except among land records and wills, where human property was passed along and sometimes named through dowry, inheritance, or bankruptcy. And by the way, the next phase of my research will be the painstaking job of going through wills of some of these prominent families and tracing people, enslaved people who were named there. But one historical gem emerges in startling detail about the likely origins of some early African settlers in the form of this 1771 ad posted by Nathan Cook, who resided on Rock Creek near Goshen and attempted to recover runaway property. According to Cook, 5 saltwater fugitives who had recently been imported from Africa had fled his employment just two months after, and were well prepared for their journey. Described as a possible family unit consisting of 2 men, Jim and Joe, and 2 women, Candace and Chloe, who fled with a boy named Jack, age 3. Cook marveled at their remarkably black skin and being, quote, highly marked in the face, which likely indicated the scarification rituals of their native land. Along with their clothing and 2 red-colored knapsacks, and a steel carried with which to make fire as they all smoked, according to Cook. He also recalls that the woman and boy had beads in their possession, providing possible clues to both place and origin and cultural significance of their homes in Africa. I'd like to point out enough clues are included in this advertisement to narrow down the date or arrival of these enslaved people. And I believe that I may have actually identified the ship and port of call that this possible family came out of from Africa and into here in Maryland. More updates on that soon. In no subsequent documents, such as 19th century census records where places of origin were listed, have I found any other reference to Africa as a birthplace for any person living in the study area. And I was able to use a keyword search through digitized census records of the 19th century to see if anyone had listed their place as birthplace as Africa, and none appeared in our study region. Tracing such origins is genealogical gold and may provide the origin for origin for descendants if they can be identified, a tool that has only become available recently through DNA testing services. Of the roughly 100,000 Africans imported into Maryland during the period where records were kept, captives are shown to have arrived from Calabar in Nigeria, Guinea, the Gambia, Cape Coast Castle in Ghana, and Mayumba in present-day Gabon, among other ports. And these people were brought to Maryland on vessels from Bristol, London, and Liverpool bearing the British flag. So Gaithersburg, without question, has had first contact Africans living here. Next, please. All right. So a little bit about Summit Hall. Summit Hall represents the establishment of Gaithersburg as a growing community in the early 1800s. Built by James DeSellum and Catherine Folks in what was called Log Town at the time. It comprised roughly 250 acres and operated with enslaved labor. Today, the homestead sits at the heart of Borough Park and is owned by the City of Gaithersburg. In 1860, John T. DeSellum, son of James and Catherine, is listed as holding 18 people in bondage, according to federal census records. Also recorded is the existence of a single dwelling for those 18 enslaved residents. Now, one dwelling for 18 people sounds like pretty cramped corners. What we don't know is if this was a freestanding structure, if it was any structure that is currently on the site, which is highly unlikely, or anything about its location. The images that we have here shows the collection of architectural types currently at Summit Hall. You see the main house on the top left with what is likely, I guess, a kitchen wing to the left. Below it is an old smokehouse, and to the right of that is a tenant house. Above that is also a plaque at the family burial ground, a few hundred yards from the main house. Recently discovered fire insurance records may provide additional details on the site through the location of the sole slave quarter remains a mystery. I think in the future, well, this quarters could have been almost any structure, a summer kitchen. It could have been an extended wing on the house, or any outbuilding that could accommodate that many people. Further research on the tenant structure pictured is also needed. A more complete story of the farm's role in slavery is still to be uncovered and awaiting interpretation, which could be achieved through an updated site survey, new archaeology, and perhaps things like dendrochronology to determine the age of the structure. And I think a lot of that work's been done in the past, but the technology is always advancing. So anyway, my 10 cents. One thing of interest to the site is also the presence of free Black people. Next, please. There we go. John, yep, perfect. Johnson family. What may have been a free Black community that had existed in the shadow of Summit Hall, namely the African-American Johnson family, who appear on the 1860 census in a household on or next to the DeSellum's property. On the left is a copy of that census page showing Rachel Johnson as matriarch of her household, along with what appears to be 4 of her children, age 7 to 16. It's interesting that there is no male figure in the household, though Rachel has these children. And that could mean anything from her husband was enslaved and thus wouldn't appear by name on a census, or perhaps was deceased, or perhaps Rachel was at the time unmarried. It is interesting to know that 2 of her children, John and Catherine, bear the name of 2 of the DeSellums. So there may be some family connection there, or it could possibly be an expression of fondness between the families. Rachel is listed on the census as a washerwoman, and this appears to be the same Rachel Johnson who shows up in the accompanying document to the right. In 1867, Rachel filed and won a suit with the Freedmen's Bureau, which was located in Rockville, a governmental organization established to aid newly freed African Americans and help them transition from slavery to freedom. And Rachel brings a suit against a man named George Appleby, who is a neighbor, white neighbor of Antebellum, charging that she failed to pay, failed to pay wages owed to her son. After reviewing the case, the Freedmen's Bureau ruled on her behalf, and she was compensated at last by Appleby. Rachel's suit represents a new kind of assertiveness and maybe even bravado that African Americans could finally express during the post-emancipation period. But as you know, that often came with threats of violence. The other thing about the Johnsons is, as I was putting this presentation together, new information came to light about the family, including some descendants who have emerged and have indicated that their family descends from that site. So I'm hoping in the next week or two I'll get to speak with them and compare notes, and that we can get more of the backstory there. But there is a story. I should also mention that as I flesh out Rachel's story, I intend her to be one of the key women that I speak about during the March presentation. So stand by. Other things to notice about this is other free Blacks also enumerated on the same page, including an African-American blacksmith, which displays some of the trades that came out of the slavery period. Next, please. Go back one. There we go. To the enslaved, whether winter, spring, summer, or fall, enslavement was forever the season of discontent for those who languished in bondage, and one which is evident through the ever-present escape notices that appeared in local papers. Ads were an invaluable source of primary data, or are a valuable source, on the enslaved, revealing physical details and ailments, demeanors, and aspirations. Family surnames and locations located near or afar assist us in identifying self-liberators both during and after bondage. On the Legacy of Slavery site, the one that is at the Maryland State Archives online, there are over 400 runaway advertisements listed for Montgomery County, with countless ads from other locales that reference people who were either suspected of running to or fleeing from Montgomery County. Sheriffs, local bounty men, and local patrollers scoured the roads looking for runaways during this period. Free Black and enslaved people stopped without the requisite papers could be arrested and advertised in local papers. And those papers would often give a description, identify the prisoner, indicate whether they claimed to be free or said that they were enslaved by someone and named them. And at the end of the ad, it often read the same: said owner of the prisoner should come forth, pay jailer's fees, or the person will be disposed of in a manner according to law, which meant they could be sold into slavery, first and foremost to pay off the jailer's fees for them being captured, and any other expenses, even if they should prove that they are free people of color. The threat of capture and return, however, was not enough to deter escapes. 355, which cuts through Gaithersburg, was a well-trodden road, provided passage to many runaways, including a stampede, if you will, of over 40 slaves who had fled from farms around Charles County in 1845. Passing through Washington, D.C., without being seriously accosted, they made their way up Rockville Pike en masse, coming under the notice of law enforcement as they approached Rockville. Pursued by the Montgomery Volunteers, who were a collective of citizen patrollers. The freedom seekers were stopped north of Rockville at a point which one source referred to as Club Town, and also, quote, within 2 miles of Gaithersburg, according to another source. The volunteers arrived, battle ensued. The self-liberators fought back valiantly. Some escaped, but many were carried back to Rockville and jailed before being returned to their owners. We are still looking for the location of Clubtown, so if anyone knows where that is, please let me know. Next, please. Oh, actually, we can go back, sorry. Thanks. Of all the locations in the study area, Goshen, for some reason, stands out as a cluster spot for escapes. But why this area developed as a hotspot is not clear at the moment. Goshen was mentioned in at least half a dozen ads I found, which reference this as an escape location. In 1813, a man named Stephen was jailed in Frederick County, claiming to have escaped from Samuel Robinson of Goshen. A few years later, "Stop the Runaway" was the headline to readers in a spring posting when John Dickerson, also of Goshen, sought to reclaim 18-year-old Phil, an artful dodger who successfully left without notice. Dickerson offered $15 if Phil was taken within 20 miles of Goshen, $20 within 30 miles, $30 within 50 miles, and a large supply of clothing. I'm sorry, and $35 for any greater distance. In 1848, Nathan Dickerson offered $100 rewards for Henrietta, a 25-year-old woman who escaped with her 5-month-old child, and, quote, a large supply of clothing. In 1858, a minister named Robert Thompson escaped from John R. Layton and successfully reached freedom in Philadelphia, where he was assisted by members of the Underground Railroad. William Still, pictured to the right, ran the main station of the Underground in that city. During a 10-year period from 1850 to 1860, he aided hundreds of self-liberators coming north. Recording the accounts of each person he aided, Still captured and the details of their journeys. Still records Thompson's story among several details of note. Thompson professed to be a minister of the Bethel Methodist faith, who left a wife and child behind while attempting to avoid a whipping for some infraction. Thompson described Layton as, quote, a very harsh kind of farmer who drank right smart, end quote, and that on the morning he, quote, took out, his master imploring him to stop, stop, as he fled. At the age of 39, William, 39 meaning Thompson's age, still in the Vigilance Committee subsidized his relocation to Canada. I'm now researching to see if Thompson ever returned to the United States or ever came back to Goshen. Next slide, please. All right. So last November for Emancipation Day, I did a presentation about the research collected around the period, the decade straddling the emancipation of slaves. So basically 1860 to 1870. So this presentation will not stray past the Civil War, but I do want to say that I have identified more Black Civil War soldiers from the study area, and I'm tracing them and their families as they returned from war and began to establish freedmen's communities. So stay tuned there. One thing I would like to speak about is one very useful research tool, which is the slave assessment records, which are also included on the Legacy of Slavery database through the state archives. In 1864, as many of you know, Maryland abolished slavery by popular vote. This came 6 months before the end of the war and a full year and a month prior to the passing of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery for African Americans nationwide. Anticipating a possible compensation act similar to one enacted in the District of Columbia in 1862 to reimburse slaveholders for their loss, a special census was conducted in Maryland among enslavers to identify which people they had claimed as property as of 1864, when the Constitution abolished slavery. Thus, the records containing hundreds of names still exist today and are helping to identify those enslaved in the area. Most interestingly, roughly 90% or so of formerly enslaved people enumerated in these records display family surnames. Perhaps more intriguing is that roughly 90% of those with family surnames show surnames different from those of their former owners. I copied a section from the Legacy of Slavery database, which appears on the screen, and it shows one branch of the Cook family and the people who they enslaved at the time of the Civil War. As you will see, if you can see that, the names associated with the Cook family are surnames Addison, Dorsey, and Duvall, all of which are old Maryland names, but not the same name as the claimant. You will also see some of the freedmen either didn't have surnames or the surnames that they had were unknown to their owners. This project will look to document one or more families from each of the historically Black communities in the study area and bring into clear focus the kinship connections which these communities made strong. I'd like to close by saying during this presentation, I wanted to kind of survey for you some of the documents and records going up to the Civil War. During the March presentation on women, I'll cover the all time periods up through the Gaithersburg Centennial, but I will do that through the lens of women in the community. And here are some of the documents and archives and sources of research. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at info@buttonfarm.org. I'd be happy to speak with anybody and answer questions. Do we want to take some questions now? Saw a few were coming.
Yeah,
in.
we do have some questions. Before we start, for those of you who signed on late, we're very sorry. It was operator error. And we're still kind of, I know it seems strange, but we're actually still kind of learning how to do this. So moving on to questions. What, if anything, can be shared about the origins of the slave routes of Prathertown?
Yeah, so so far in this project, I have not started the community based interviews. I have spoken with a few community members, but I'm going to be going to each of the historic locations and researching, trying to really make those kinship connections. But if I'm correct, Prathertown emerged from property owned by the Blunts, I believe, and it is likely that the land on which Prathertown currently exists was the former plantation land, but don't quote me on that yet. Definitely more to come on that.
All right, Judy, thanks. This is a good plug. Montgomery History, montgomeryhistory.org. This week they're replaying a program they did a while ago on the Underground Railroad by Jenny Masur. So you can go to their website. It's under Speakers Bureau, I think. But yeah, it's a good presentation, and I encourage anybody to go listen to it. It's available online all week, so you can.
Yes, Jenny's new book on the Underground Railroad in Maryland, and a few years ago she wrote a book about the Underground Railroad in DC. Definitely worth the read.
Definitely. Okay, what, if anything, can be shared about the collection with the Magruder family and its slave history in connection to the Agricultural History Farm Park?
So the Magruders at the land, which is now the Ag History Farm Park, is actually out of our study area. I think they were connected to the house that's there, the Buzzard House, which is owned by Park and Planning, and was my old office back in 1992 when I worked for the Park and Planning historian's office. But you know, Magruders were prolific in the county, and many of them were slaveholders. a friend of mine runs a website called Magruders Landing, if you look it up, and she's the foremost expert on the Magruder family. For laughs, I should tell you that a few years ago, I had my ancestry DNA test done, trying to solve some family mysteries. My mom's side's from Texas, my dad's side's from Georgia, but in the past few years, I found Magruders on my DNA match. So who knows, maybe I descend from the Ag History Farm Park. One never knows. Anyway, yeah.
That's true. Well, actually, does anybody else have any questions? Please. Oh, there is a question. Something about the Mennonites. Do you know if the Mennonites were assisting the Goshen freedom seekers? Not sure they were Mennonites.
Yeah, I don't think at the time. I think
Yeah, that church was a Methodist church at the time. It didn't become a Mennonite church until I don't know, much later.
20th century.
Yeah.
Yes, is my understanding. Yes, but in general, Mennonites and other German Anabaptist orders were generally against slavery. Many of those religious orders you can still find active in Pennsylvania, and especially in Lancaster County. There was one order called the River Brethren of Mennonites, and I believe they had some kind of edict that it was a sin against God to not help a freedom seeker. So the moral imperative was strong. Anti-slavery imperative was strong among the Mennonites in general.
All right. I don't see any other questions. We will be posting this on the museum's YouTube and Facebook pages, so you can refer back to it, especially if you missed the beginning. I just want to remind you again that we will be doing another presentation on Wednesday, March 8th. Hopefully we'll have all the link issues that came up this time will not happen next time. And I do also want to thank, which I hadn't done before, is that part of the funding for this project is through a grant that we got from Heritage Montgomery. So I want to give them credit where credit is due. So thank you all for joining us. And for those who came in late, for persevering to join us. And we hope to see you in March. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.